Good morning, everyone. I'm San Francisco Mayor London Breed, and I want to thank you all for joining us here today to talk about public safety on a whole nother level in light of the challenges that our city continues to face. You know, this has been a problem that has persisted in this city for some time now. And the fact is, things have gotten worse over time. And I want to take a moment to appreciate our public safety officials that are joining us here today, some of whom you will hear from in a short moment. But thank you to our Police Chief Bill Scott for being here, our Fire Chief Janine Nicholson, our Sheriff Paul Miyamoto, our Director of the Department of Public Health, Dr. Grant Colfax, Director of Emergency Management, Mary Ellen Carroll, and the Director of Homelessness and Supportive Services, Shireen McSpadden, as well as members of the Board of Supervisors who are joining us here today, Supervisor Catherine Stephanie and Supervisor Asha Safai. I'm here to discuss, as I said, public safety in this city. In recent months, we've not only seen a number of high-profile incidents of brazen robberies and car break-ins, but also street behavior and criminal activity, especially in the Tenderloin, that has become far too normal and cannot continue to be tolerated. All of our residents, our workers, and everyone who visits our city should feel safe no matter what part of town they're in. And I know that San Francisco is a compassionate city. We are a city that prides ourselves on second chances and rehabilitation. But we're not a city where anything goes. Our compassion should not be mistaken for weakness or indifference. Today, we're announcing a series of public safety initiatives to create a city that is safe and turns the tide on what we have recently seen in San Francisco. And to be clear, what I'm proposing today and what I will be proposing in the future will make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I don't care. At the end of the day, the safety of the people of San Francisco is the most important thing to me. And we are past the point where what we see is even remotely acceptable. The first of these initiatives is the Tenderloin Emergency Plan, which is already underway. During COVID, we showed what this city can do when we unify our efforts and we work together collaboratively. Through our emergency action, we protected the health of this city, and San Francisco was a national model for addressing COVID. We saved lives. And let me say this, the Tenderloin needs an emergency response, period. I spent a lot of time going to the Tenderloin and seeing what's happening there. During the pandemic, when there were tents everywhere, we intervened, we made a significant difference, but now what I see is far, far worse. While there are still issues of needing to get people off the streets and into housing, and there are also very important, urgent safety issues. Last week, I met with a group of families from the Tenderloin. Hearing their stories were hard. Hearing their stories were heartbreaking. Just imagine if you had to walk your kids down the streets of the Tenderloin every single day with people shooting up, selling drugs, and because the sidewalks were so packed with people, you had to walk out onto the street in incoming traffic on a regular basis. You got these brand new playgrounds where you don't even feel comfortable walking your kids to play in them because of everything that they see around them, where you don't feel safe. The PTSD the challenges, the cramped conditions, the nasty streets. And when I say nasty, full of feces and urine that Department of Public Works is cleaning every single day, but it comes back just a few hours later. Last week because it drove home during that meeting the point clearly that we can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And every day we let things linger. Our residents are suffering, and we need to be different, to act with urgency, and to be aggressive in countering these problems. And this is why I've directed Mary Ellen Carroll, the Director of Emergency Management, to lead our multi-agency coordination on this effort, bringing the coordination and urgent responses that we brought to COVID this year. In essence, a COVID command that will be a public safety command that will be specifically targeted at the Tenderloin community. And I'm going to have Mary Ellen Carroll walk through the details of what this means. Our priorities are focused on issues of drug dealing, violent crime, public drug use, safe passage and accessibility for the people who live and work there, neighborhood cleanliness, housing resources, emergency medical calls, and we will be tackling illegal vending. In the short term, that means taking immediate and necessary action like fixing the lights, adding additional lighting in very dark areas, dealing with broken trash cans and trash all over the neighborhood. But it also means coordinating with the police and the sheriff's office on felony warrant sweeps, which have led to the arrest of 23 individuals so far with outstanding warrants. These are some of the people who have been holding this neighborhood hostage, and our criminal justice system has a responsibility to hold them accountable. When the police make an arrest, the residents of the Tenderloin should not see that same person back on the streets the next day dealing drugs right in front of their neighborhood. The next stage of this plan will roll out next month and continue for at least 2 months after that. This second stage will continue the progress made earlier on the law enforcement, but also focus on interventions and connections of services to people facing addiction and other challenges. But to be clear, we are not giving people choice anymore. We are not going to just walk by and let someone use in broad daylight on the streets and not give them the choice between going to the location we have identified them or going to jail. This will involve social workers, outreach workers, police, and community groups working together to offer wraparound services and connection to a new temporary linkage site where people can start treatment, meeting people where they are, being the compassionate city that we are, but not tolerating the mess that we've had to tolerate. The final phase of this intervention focuses on keeping the streets safe and accessible for everyone who calls the Tenderloin home. This includes securing long-term funding for ambassador programs, supporting community-led beautification and open space projects, and making environmental changes that promote safety and neighborhood support. This also includes long-term partnerships with community organizations and residents to maintain the improvements made during the crisis operations phase. The key will be to never let the Tenderloin go back to what we are seeing today, to not go backwards, to move forward, to feel and see a difference. But public safety isn't just about the Tenderloin. We know that there are issues all over this city. Our second initiative is targeting the illegal vending on our streets that is incentivizing the break-ins and robberies like the ones we have seen at stores and small businesses throughout the city. And you know what's the sad reality? Before I was even an elected official, when the cell phone thefts were at an all-time high, everybody knew that whatever they stole for cell phones, laptops, anything you steal in this city, you take it down to the Tenderloin, and there's someone waiting to give you cash for those items. I want to be clear that these are not victimless crimes, and they are not just property crimes. We're seeing an increase in the use of high-speed getaway cars that in some cases are stolen vehicles, physical violence, and the use of weapons. Today, I'm introducing legislation to disincentivize theft by making the resale of stolen goods more difficult. For the resale of goods on the streets, it will create an exclusion zone for all street vending activity in existing locations that are highly problematic, such as UN Plaza. It will mandate highly visible posting of approved vendor permits to make it simple and easy for inspectors at any time, and request proof of purchase immediately from anyone attempting to sell these goods. And if they can't produce it, then we will take action. It will allow the Department of Public Works to associate with law enforcement if there is a need to move an individual who's not compliant, and the ability to confiscate goods. These are basic but important actions, and I want to thank Supervisor Safai for co-sponsoring this important legislation. We also know that we need to give our officers more tools to effectively do their jobs. In 2019, the Board of Supervisors passed a law that limited law enforcement's ability to use camera feeds during emergency situations. There are exceptions where they can, but for a lot of the issues like what happened in Union Square, they could not. Where there were multiple robbery crews hitting multiple stores, they couldn't even access those cameras, which is ridiculous. Think about that. During an incident of severe looting, our officers are not able to use a tool that we have that other jurisdictions all over this country can use. This creates barriers for law enforcement's ability to respond quickly when responding to critical incidents and significant public safety issues. We need amendments to clarify that officers are allowed to access these cameras when needed to address critical public safety issues. There is a balance to be had, I know. But right now, if our officers cannot use cameras during a mass looting event, then that policy is out of balance. We are actively working on those amendments with plans to introduce it in January, and my hope is that the board will support changes. Lastly, we're increasingly asking our police department to do more. They're working more overtime to address these challenges, including responding to the rash number of retail thefts and confiscating more than 23 kilos of fentanyl in the last year alone, 4 times the amount in previous years. They've been expanding a number of deployments through our tourism deployment plan, so when people come here and spend money and support our economy, they feel safe and they want to return. And we changed the narrative about what people say about San Francisco. And focusing on auto burglaries to make significant arrests on prolific crews who time and time again are committing these acts and impacting the quality of life for San Franciscans. They've done all of this while being part of a police reform movement that has led to dramatic decreases in the use of force incidents and a rapidly diversifying police force that better reflects the communities they serve. Our officers are committed to doing that work, and they're committed to keeping us safe. But everything they've been doing over the recent months and everything we're going to ask of them in the coming months before we pass a new budget is going to require more overtime funding, and it's going to require more police officers. My budget office is currently working with the San Francisco Police Department and the chief to understand what the needs will be to get us through 2022, and I will introduce a supplemental to ask this board for the resources we need so that the deployment that exists now is not over after the holidays. The deployment that we are imposing in this city needs to be permanent. And as we plan for our upcoming budget, we will ensure those resources, including academy classes and overtime, are in place as part of the 2-year budget, and I will introduce that budget at the end of May, but we can't wait to continue the resources that we have now. Some of these actions are underway immediately, while others require a significant investment and legislation. And there will be more work to come on this front. Taken together, they can make a real difference on our streets and in our city. And before I bring up Chief Scott, I want to take a moment to recognize the work more recently of our police officers and their commitment. Vacations have been canceled, time off has been canceled, it's been all hands on deck. And at the end of the day, what has made the most significant difference to address public safety is, yes, we've made investments in social service programs. Yes, we pushed for reforms to our criminal justice system. We will continue to do that. But when a line is crossed, people have to be held accountable for the crimes they commit in our city. And that's where our police officers have been critically important to our ability to do so. Thank you to Sheriff Miyamoto, who has been a real partner, and I'm looking forward to working more with allowing our sheriff's deputies to work off duty in uniform at a number of locations throughout San Francisco. Their partnership with our frontline workers and community groups and ambassadors have been really essential in keeping us safe. And finally, let me just say, at the end of the day, I know this sounds like a lot of different things. I know this sounds like more and more promises that may not materialize. But I want each and every person in this city to know this work and what we are going to do to turn around how people feel in San Francisco is the most important thing to me. This is a city that has a population of less than 1 million people with an over $12 billion budget. The residents of this city have been extremely generous in providing us with the resources we need to make a difference. And now, the priorities we need to make must be to protect them, must be to turn things around in their neighborhoods. When you are in a room full of people, I would say probably anywhere between 90 and 95% of folks could raise their hand and say that either their car has been broken into, or they've been a victim in some capacity or another. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. And it's time that the reign of criminals who are destroying our city, it is time for it to come to an end. And it comes to an end when we take the steps to be more aggressive with law enforcement, more aggressive with the changes in our policies, and less tolerant of all the bullshit that has destroyed our city. We are going to turn this around, and this is the most important thing for me, and I know leaders of public safety in this city at this time. And with that, I'd like to introduce our Police Chief, Bill Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. Let me start with this. The people in our city who have been impacted by crime, by quality of life issues such as open-air drug usage, street vending, some of our issues with our unhoused population that lead to trash on the streets and needles on the streets and things like that. These things have to change. Now, from a policing perspective, I want to reiterate a few things and piggyback on the mayor's comments about what you can expect from the San Francisco Police Department. First and foremost, law enforcement and enforcement of drug dealing offenses. We need to do more. It's little consolation that we've arrested almost 600 people in the Tenderloin alone this year. It's little consolation when you're still seeing drug dealers in your neighborhood and on your blocks day in and day out. It's little consolation that we've seized 23 kilos of fentanyl, 4 times the amount of what we seized last year, when you're still seeing fentanyl being sold in your communities day in and day out. It's little consolation for me to stand here and spout statistics about any forms of arrest or enforcement actions when you're seeing these activities day in and day out. And here's the point to all of this. We will continue to make arrests, and we will make more arrests, but there are areas in this city that need constant 24-hour police presence while we make those arrests. From the lips of the people who live and work and play in this city to my ears, this is what I'm hearing over and over and over again. And I thank the mayor and our elected officials who are here with us and the public for drawing the line. Because this police department will draw the line, but we need the resources to do it. And let me go in a little bit more detail about how this works, because I'm going to speak for my officers. They're asked to go out there and do a job, make an arrest. They make an arrest. They're in the station writing reports, booking evidence. That's the process that has to happen. While that's being done, the corner that they were standing on to make that arrest, nobody's there. And it's as if they were never there in the first place. When those arrests are made, we can't have a situation where the officers are then not in those neighborhoods that need us the most. That's why deployment is so important. And I'm a witness to this. I've been out with the officers. I've walked those blocks with them. They make an arrest, they're out of the field. 30 minutes later, I go back, and it's like we've never been there. There are places in this city where we need constant police presence. And let me be very clear on what I'm saying. I'm not saying unconstitutional arrest. I'm not saying brutalizing people and using force. What I'm saying is we need to be out there policing, engaging with the communities that we serve, and policing the right way. That takes time, that takes patience, that takes money, that takes resources. And we're committed to doing it. I've heard from officer after officer after officer. When I ask the question, what do you need to do your jobs? The answer is usually 2 things. We need enough people to do our jobs the way we've been asked to do it, and we need to be supported when we do our jobs the right way. As your chief of police, that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the resources to do our job like we've been asked to do it, and I'm asking for support for our officers when they do the job the way that you asked them to do it. Because here's the third thing. Police departments all across this country are facing hiring challenges. This city is no exception. We need to have an environment in this city, and hear me very clearly, where people want to come to work here and be police officers. That doesn't happen without support. And Mayor Breed, thank you for your support on this. We need the public support. They need my support. And they deserve that if we're asking them to do a very difficult job. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail before I introduce Mary Ellen Carroll to the microphone. Open air drug use, open air drug sales. The consistency of the arrest is very important. When we have the evidence, we need consequences. And look, I'm here to talk about what we can control, we, the San Francisco Police Department, can control. But when people are using drugs, and some of the people that I'm talking about, they have substance addiction issues. They need professional medical assistance to get through those issues. We have to be compassionate with that. But being compassionate does not mean that we have to turn a blind eye to what's happening on the streets. We're in a situation now, for good reason, where the criminal justice system has changed in the last decade. A decade ago, possession of a small amount of crack cocaine or heroin would land you in jail for a felony. That is no longer the case. But it doesn't mean we can't take action. It doesn't mean we can't be compassionate. It doesn't mean we can't rely on medical and healthcare research to have a balance of compassion and treatment and enforcement. We've struggled with that. I'll be the first to admit it. But that day is no more. We will engage. We will engage consistently. We will offer up services. The city and the mayor and everybody standing here in front of you are working on a plan to do just that in the very, very near future. But at the end of the day, at the end of all of this, people will not be allowed to smoke meth, to smoke fentanyl, to inject heroin in their arms in public spaces. And it's very important that we are consistent and that we sustain this effort. Because to do it for 2 weeks is not going to help us long term. And again, it takes resources, it takes a commitment, and it takes a desire to sustain this effort. This department will own its shortcomings. We're not a perfect department, even though we try to be that. But I can say one thing, that the commitment is there. Given the resources, we know we can have better outcomes than what we've seen, and we can have consistent outcomes. And we want to be held accountable for those resources. I want to be held accountable for the use of those resources efficiently, but we need the resources. Make no mistake about it. Using technology. I can't say it any better than it was stated, but I will say this because I've been doing this job for almost 33 years now. If we can't use the technology we have in a way that protects civil liberties but still addresses the crime and the criminal issues that have been disclosed, then why do we have it? If you are the one that is suffering from a victim of a violent crime, or you are the shop owner or storekeeper that had your business demolished and looted, it's a little consolation to say, yeah, we can get the video after you've been victimized. It's a little consolation. Yeah, it helps in the investigations. Yeah, there's value to it. But we need to do better. We have to do better. And lastly, we've seen what happened in our city in Union Square on November 19th. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's the first time it happened in that nature. And then we saw it happening everywhere else. I'm here to tell you that that increased deployment made and continues to make a difference. Again, from people's lips to my ears, seeing it with my own eyes, walking alongside the officers. And I've done this all over the city. But in Union Square, after the world was set on edge with what they saw, the people that have to go there and work every day, the people that have to take transportation to get there, the people that want to come there and shop without looking over their shoulder, wondering if 50 people are going to run in the store with hammers and golf clubs and guns and knives or whatever else they're having. It matters to them that we're there. And it matters to them that we stay there. So we need to sustain this effort. So you have our commitment. I want to thank my public safety partners, our elected officials, for supporting this effort. Chief Nicholson, Fire Chief, Sheriff Miyamoto, and many others. Dr. Colfax and his team, we are all in this together. Make no mistakes about it. We have to collaborate better than we ever have before, and I'm so happy with the leadership of the mayor and many others that will make sure that the same thing that we showed the world with our COVID response, that when we put our heads and our minds and our collective efforts together, this city can lead the nation. and we did on COVID, and I strongly believe we can do it with the issues and the challenges that we have in our city, whether it be the Tenderloin, retail theft, violent crime, or any other thing that we face. We can do it when we do it together, and we have the support and the resources to get us there. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mary Ellen Carroll, the Director of our Department of Emergency Management.
Thank you, Chief Scott, and thank you, Mayor Breed. Emergency management provides coordination during times of crisis. And today, as you've heard, there is no more significant crisis than what's happening on our streets, and especially in the Tenderloin. During the pandemic, San Francisco demonstrated what can be accomplished when the city and community work together. We are going to draw on our expertise developed during the COVID response and bring the same level of focus and coordination to address the crisis in the Tenderloin. At the mayor's direction, the Department of Emergency Management has established a multi-agency incident management team, and we are going to collaborate with our community partners. Over the next few months, the team will coordinate focused crisis operations through a multi-phased approach. The first phase, which is our assessment phase, is already underway, and we are analyzing the top challenges in the neighborhood and the resources that will be needed to address them. Through meetings with community stakeholders and residents, we have developed a shared understanding of the challenges we will address. These include many that you've heard already: public substance abuse and linking people in crisis to care and support services, enforcement and the disruption of criminal activity, and infrastructure improvement that supports safe passage and accessibility. Our next phase of operations will begin later this month and will focus on rolling out specific mitigations that address our most destructive problems. During this phase, social workers, clinicians, community partners, and police officers will work in concert to offer wraparound services at a new temporary linkage site. When this site is established, it will allow individuals in crisis to access basic needs like hygiene and connect them to resources like substance abuse treatment and housing. At the same time, as you've heard, law enforcement will be disrupting criminal activities that harm people struggling with substance abuse and poverty. City staff will also prioritize infrastructure repairs and more targeted and frequent cleaning. Our response will operate with the same level of urgency, coordination, and focus that was so successful during our fight against the pandemic. The final phase of our interventions will focus on transitioning to a sustained operation that will help keep the streets safe and accessible for all who call Tenderloin home. This phase will include long-term partnerships with our community organizations and residents to maintain the improvements that we will achieve during this crisis operation response. The Tenderloin is home to families, local businesses, nonprofits, immigrants, seniors, and young professionals who all deserve a safe and healthy place to call home. Last week, as the mayor spoke about, we met with this diverse group of San Franciscans, and they demanded that the city take action so that they no longer have to live in fear in their neighborhood. Through our efforts, the city will stand with mothers who want their children to get safely to and from home and school and the playgrounds and the parks. We will stand with merchants and workers who are just trying to make a living. And we will stand with and care for our neighbors struggling with substance abuse, mental health, and poverty. I want to thank Mayor Breed for her leadership, and at this time, I will introduce our Sheriff, Paul Miyamoto.
Good afternoon, everyone. These recent incidents, this recent uptick, all of the things that have been discussed here by all of the previous speakers have created a citywide public safety concern that the San Francisco Sheriff's Office is prepared to contribute to the solution and provide services and support necessary to make sure that our collective efforts are not just a flash in the pan, are not just a temporary solution, but something that is long-term and sustainable. I think it's very important to recognize that we have city leadership here to address this concern, just as we did with the COVID pandemic, as has been mentioned earlier. The same leadership is here to address the problem of safety and public safety. And as a public safety official, as an elected law enforcement public safety official, I am very grateful for the collaboration and the coordination between not just the electeds, but the other leaders of our city government in addressing these concerns. For our part at the Sheriff's Office, we are going to be redeploying resources, redeploying services that we already have in place in order to address the immediate concern, in the hope of creating a model to be sustainable over the long term to address the safety concerns that the city faces. Our staff will be working in collaboration with the police department in terms of identifying and analyzing crime trends, in terms of identifying areas of concern, not just in the Tenderloin for this immediate deployment, but for long-term partnerships and collaborations to keep people safe. We have over 800 sworn deputies in the Sheriff's Office who, up until this point, have worked with and collaborated with the police department on numerous occasions in providing public safety services to San Francisco. We will continue to do so in this new model to be able to provide the services to address these concerns, to finally say no to some of the issues that we face, and more importantly, a perspective that the Sheriff's Office provides and our staff members provide is compassionate mitigation of these challenges. We don't just work as law enforcement deputies out in the street. We don't just work in the justice system with justice-involved persons, but we're there with them for long periods of time, in the jails, in the courts, in the healthcare facilities. We establish relations and relationships that we hope to leverage in reaching out to people and making sure that they have support and have access to services, as Mary Ellen mentioned, as the chief has mentioned, as the mayor has mentioned. We're here to make sure that we ensure a compelled path through the justice system, but one that has access to services and a commitment to helping people to get out of the cycle of behavior, the cycle of violence, the cycle of addictive behaviors that create the situation that we're in. So that commitment is what you get from us at the Sheriff's Office as partners and collaborators with the rest of city leadership. We look forward to this. I want to also recognize something that was mentioned earlier. Our staff members and the people that have been dedicated to public safety for their careers. It was mentioned by the chief that a lot of us are working overtime. We're understaffed, we're underutilized, and we're working overtime to get things done. The commitment that we have here, the leadership commitment reflected in the long-term solution of making sure we're adequately resourced, that we have the people that we need to get the job done, does not go unheard by me, and is most appreciated during these times. So thank you to everyone up here today. Thank you for the commitment you have, Madam Mayor, for making sure that we're all supported in these efforts to keep everyone safe. Thank you.
Thank you. I realize that there was a lot of information to process. We'll be providing that information through my communications team. And at this time, are there any questions? Christian?
Well, that answer can be answered in two parts. First, it's the short term. First, we have to stop what's going on, and with the understanding that there's a possibility that it's going to displace somewhere else. In the area of the Tenderloin, we sort of know where those places are, and that's what I said earlier about if we're in one place doing enforcement, making narcotics arrests, and then the officers are off the streets because they're doing what they need to do by way of processing and things of that nature, we have to still be present in order to not let the problem repopulate as soon as we leave. Now, just from a mathematically speaking, we cannot be on every block in the city. I wish we could, but we can't. There are some communities that are more resilient than others, but we have communities that need a lot of help, and we need a constant presence. Because one thing I know that I've seen with my own eyes, when we're out there, the people aren't selling drugs in front of us. What they do is they go down the block, as you stated, they wait on us to leave, they come back when we leave. But if we're down that next block, or we go down to that next block with them, we got to be able to hold the ground, because you got to understand what type of drug market we're dealing with. It's a very transitory drug market, which means these aren't people who, most often, people that live on these blocks. These are people that are coming either from different parts of the city, and it's a geographical location where people who want to buy drugs, they know that's the spot to buy it. People who want to sell drugs, they know there's going to be plenty of demand, and we have to disrupt all of that, while at the same time trying to be able to predict where they're going to go next, and we need to be there waiting on them. That's why this is so resource intensive. It's a very humbling experience to do this. It can be done, it takes time, but it can be done. It's been done in this city. There are parts of the city that used to have far more problems than it has right now, that are much, much better. So, resources, collaboration, and understanding that we have to mean what we say and say what we mean and be firm in our commitment to not let people do this in our city. That's both use drugs in the open air and sell drugs. We're not going to arrest everybody in one day. We can go there and make 20 arrests right now, and there's going to be 20 other people that will come right behind them. We realize that. That's why we got to be there when they come. So that's a part of the strategy.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the arrest will be made by the police department with the hope that our district attorney will prosecute those cases. And accountability means that, it's not always jail time. It's some sort of punishment related that's appropriate to the crime. Because let's be clear, when we talk about criminal justice reform, maybe it's someone in their first offense. Do we think they should just be let out and then charges dismissed? No. There could be a layer of community service. There could be a number of other things that they're required to do as a result of committing that crime. And currently there are challenges with accountability, and my hope is that the DA, who we are definitely trying to work with, will hold the people that the police arrest accountable. We will, in every single instance of arrest, put together a report that is clear, that makes it clear in terms of what was actually done and what the specific offense is. And our hope is that in light of everything that's been going on, that the maximum charges for any of these cases, are what the DA goes after. Because regardless of the fact that, there are things that we want to do to reform this system, this is a industry, the car break-ins, the theft and the looting, the drug dealing, like just how those things are happening, but also how much more violent they're becoming. So from my perspective, my goal is to, of course, push our officers to make the arrest, even if it's sadly over and over and over again, and to continue to do my very best to work with our district attorney.
You mentioned trying to work with the district attorney. Was he invited to come here today? Are you having conversations with him about this?
Well, I have conversations with him regularly about everything that happens in this city related to charges that we hope he will impose. So he and I have a relationship where we have a conversation about many of those things. But as you know, he's an independently elected official. And at the end of the day, you need to ask him about what he plans to do. Next.
Was he invited to be here today? You invested a lot of alternative responses to police, such as the street crisis response teams. Obviously, that's still ongoing. But why the sudden shift? And are some of those responses not working?
So I will say that, when we talk about, the number of stabbings, the number of shootings, the number of physical assaults that are occurring, unfortunately, our ambassadors and all these other great services we have, they're not equipped to handle those things. And in fact, some of them have put themselves in harm's way as a result of it. So too many people are crossing a line, and it's time for us to make a change. And that's where law enforcement comes in. To be clear, when those funds from the police department were redirected specifically to serve the African American community, there were no cuts to the number of officers that we had in the department. There was really a goal of, making some transformative changes with law enforcement and making it clear that we are going to invest in people to avoid them even being involved with the criminal justice system in the first place, but also to make it clear to our criminal justice system that we need to change what happens disproportionately with policing. So I think it sent a clear message, and that investment has been consistent. And I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a reversal. I would say that things have changed as it relates to our significant need for law enforcement, and so an investment is necessary as a result of it. I'm sorry, I can't. So part of what's in the plan is giving the opportunity, say for example, Department of Public Works, they are the enforcement leg of some of the illegal vending, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have the ability to completely force in some of these instances, and part of the legislation is to open the door of collaboration. We continue to work on building that relationship of trust, and I think ultimately, unfortunately, we do have people who, under no circumstances, are they willing to work with our police officers. And from my perspective, at this point, it's important that we have nonprofit agencies and people who are non-public safety personnel. We need them to be willing to develop relationships with the people who need to protect our city. Because ultimately, and I'll tell you an example of one of our persons who was out there working for a particular nonprofit, doing everything he could to be that voice, and sadly he was stabbed. So we have those kinds of situations that occur, and ultimately, when the crime occurs, then everyone wants help from the police. So my goal is to make sure that the relationships are being built. Our department has undergone significant changes around anti-bias training, use of force, a number of things that I feel strongly we have been putting in action with all the decisions that they have been making and what we're seeing in terms of our use of force cases and a number of issues in San Francisco that existed in the past. Our goal is to get to a better place, of course, but in the meantime, this is where we are and this is what we need to do. Oh.
So just to address the issue of how we are going to be working together, which I think is your question, the truth is that we have a united group on our incident management team that have very disparate views about how to approach these problems. That's the truth. But what we're doing is and what we have been doing over the last few weeks is sitting down, talking through these, and really negotiating a place that we all feel comfortable to move forward. And that is part of the approach that we have. We are a multidisciplinary team. Part of what this operation will be over the next few months is daily coordination, daily assessment. We'll be reviewing on every single day what our operation plan is for that day, and then looking at what happened the day before. So this allows us to be very agile. It allows us to adjust. And it allows us to evaluate what we're doing. And that is really critical. We have to be successful, and so we're going to come to the table. We are starting this with a set of objectives and tactics. If they don't work, we'll sit down again, and we will adjust.
When the mayor talked about no longer giving people who use drugs openly a choice, that it's either get help or go to jail, how does that look like for your officers when you immediately start arresting public drug use?
So the balance with the drug usage, particularly when we're dealing with people who are addicted, is we can't ignore what our healthcare professionals are telling us about what research has shown that works, how to treat people with substance abuse problems. And I would venture to say that the vast majority of people that we're talking about have some type of substance abuse disorder. The struggle has been, how do we balance that with the enforcement piece? So what we're going to hopefully put into place, as Director Carroll has talked about, is we have to listen to the scientists and the science, but at the same time, we can't just allow people to use on the street. So if we are offering services and we are consistently engaging and offering services and getting people to this service location, if they're willing to do it, they should be given an opportunity to do that. But one opportunity, particularly in the same day. For instance, let me play this out for you. A person is in need of help. They're using on the streets, and we engage and we offer them the ability to go and receive services, and they say yes. They go to the services, they won't be arrested. But let's say that same day we see that same person. We're not asking again. Then it becomes enforcement. Now, the laws are the laws. So possession, use, those types of things, they're still misdemeanors. So the law still allows them the ability to be cited out if we can identify them. We have to deal with that and live with that. Let's say they do that and they're cited out, and then a third time happens in that same day. The law also allows for us to ask for a detention based on the likelihood that the offenses will continue. All of those processes that I just talked about will be put in place. We have to be consistent in doing that. And I'm going to go back to what I keep saying. That takes resources, because what we have seen is when we're not there to engage, and I'm talking about the police department, when we're not on those streets where this type of activity is happening, we see the open air usage. We see the activity that we're trying to address, and we can't address it if we're not there. So while we're in the process of enforcing, we have to replace those officers with officers that are constantly in the streets in some of these more challenging areas. And that's been a real struggle for us. It's been a tremendous struggle, because I'm telling you, if you go and you've seen this in action, it's a revolving door. We'll put a bunch of officers in, let's say, UN Plaza. The streets will be clean while we're out there for the most part. We get called away because of emergency calls, redeployments, those type of things, other emergencies. And probably within 20, 30 minutes, it's like we've never been there. So that's why the consistency of deployment, along with compassion, offering services, giving people a chance to engage in those services. But we have to be consistent in, you're smoking crack on our streets, you're smoking meth, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to engage. You may not go to jail in the first time, but we're going to engage, and we're going to disrupt that behavior. So we have to rely on our health professionals and the research of what works from a clinical perspective, but that needs to be balanced with this whole enforcement issue, and it's a struggle. It's not an easy solution.
That's all we have. Thank you. Thank you.